Okay, so for today for '08 on content marketing, I'm joined by Tyler, Director of Customer Success and Strategy, and Andy, the VP of Digital Marketing here at '08. So when it comes to talking about content marketing, we think it's super important because content marketing costs 62% less than outbound marketing and generates 3 times as many leads, according to the Content Marketing Institute. So let's kick off with the basics. What is content marketing?
At its base, it's about creating valuable content. It's about getting content, putting content together that helps your customers or your potential customers solve problems, address big industry issues, learn more, essentially creates value for them, and getting that in front of them. It's typically done organically, but paid can also factor into it. The main thing is that you're not so much running out and pursuing your customers or doing outbound as you are putting out the content that is essentially going to be a magnet for them to come in and find out more about you. So it's that place where your value and your capabilities intersect with the information the customer needs, then providing that as a first point of conversation and a way for them to get to know your products and services.
If you've ever downloaded a white paper or watched a free webinar, those are great examples of content marketing. And near and dear to my heart, if you've seen the recent Lego Masters television show, that's a prime example of really big, dream big content marketing. The idea here is to really intentionally create that content that's going to begin building a really positive user experience right from the start. Like before they may even be aware of your brand, you're building content that they're going to find helpful, that's going to get shared. And through that process and their learning and that trust building, they're gaining exposure to your brand there.
Okay, so what is the goal of content marketing, or why should I want to do this? Or why do I need to do this?
Let's, I think start with a real basic core concept of really almost any marketing program, which is that every company needs to tell its story. Every organization, I should say, because it includes nonprofits, for that matter, government agencies, any entity that's interacting with public or with the end group of end users needs to tell a story and explain its value, explain its mission and vision. So even very broadly, even if you're not selling a product, even if you're a nonprofit or an educational institution, you're providing a service, you still have a message that you need to impart to your audience. There's a lot of different ways to do that, and that's essentially the essence of marketing. So the first question is, why would you not do this? I mean, why? So it's about figuring out all the different ways that you can tell your story and share your expertise. And the end goal is ultimately to get more eyeballs on your website and get more eyeballs on your social and increase brand awareness and build your reputation and do all of those wonderful things that will eventually result in revenue. So in that sense, I mean, it's marketing. It's not entirely altruistic, but it has to start from an altruistic place. If you're not really thinking hard about you have to be customer centric. If you're not thinking hard about who your customers are and what information they really need, what's top of mind for them, and how you intersect with that, then you're not going to have a successful content marketing campaign, or I shouldn't say content marketing strategy. And it is a strategy, and it is very, very long term. It's a game that's going to play out over potentially months and years. It's a lifetime endeavor. So it's not just a quick hit and like an ad campaign and you're done.
I think this is really a realignment of traditional marketing, that quite well established but relatively new model of providing that really positive user experience. You look at Starbucks and they don't have the best coffee, but they have a stellar user experience. And for that, they are extremely successful. Content marketing will not only align your marketing team and output with your customer, but throughout that process, it also then will bleed into your sales process and make sure that that's aligned, which then, once you have gotten that customer, your content marketing efforts can continue to ensure that those customers are engaged and they become awesome brand ambassadors because of that phenomenal experience that they've had with your brand.
So tell me more about that process and how content marketing can really help address our companies, our organizations target audiences throughout the customer purchase journey.
Not only do you have to have content that's geared to your different buyer personas and their sets of problems, but then also you need to think about where they are in their overall journey, and you have to have content that's geared to the top, middle, and lower portions of the funnel. And that's going to become increasingly, you also have to cater to their level of attention and their level of interest in what you have to offer. So a top of funnel content might be something as simple as a cool info bite or a really short social video or something that grabs attention and maybe makes a point or two, educates in some way. You can deepen that with middle funnel content. Might be something more expansive. It might be an ebook or some other, it could be a webinar. It could be something where you're expanding on the topic and providing more interest. It could be just a lengthy blog post or a blog series. And then ultimately at the bottom of the funnel, you might have something more high value, maybe something that is hopefully unique or that's a result of original research or that's so tied into your core expertise. Could be a survey, it could be a study of some kind, something that in a B2B context, a prospect would be willing to trade a little bit of email or other contact information for in order to get that. And how many of us have done that? I mean, you always make that calculation. How badly do I want that ebook? And how many fields on the form do I need to fill out in order to get this? And yeah, sure, I'll take this. And you may even cynically think, oh yeah, and I'll unsubscribe afterwards. I just really wanted the information. But the point is, you wanted that information. You thought it was valuable enough to trade a little bit of contact information, knowing that that's essentially a bit of a transaction that is now going to make you visible to that company. But you've read enough of their stuff, you've seen enough of their content that you now have trust that they're not going to spam you, that they seem like they're good people and they obviously can help you solve problems. And so based on that, you do that. So you really have to gear content to all of those stages. It's not just go out, throw a piece of content in front of someone, get them to a landing page and get them to convert. It's just not going to happen that quickly.
And I think the really important thing here is to keep in mind that we're trying to build trust and value for the customer. These assets or these webinars that, Andy talked about aren't going to be about our product and singing our praises. It needs to be value add for your customer in order for it to be effective. Otherwise, you're going to come off as just really, missing the mark from their perspective, and they don't want to hear about you. They want to learn about, the industry or the area that you're an expert in. And that in turn is going to show your authority and your expertise, build that trust. And then once they get further into the funnel is when you can be talking about your product and, kind of tying in those calls to action around, learn how we can help you with this related area.
People are not naive. People understand why that's being done. But if it's done right, it should almost elicit a response of, wow, so where they didn't even pitch me. Right. I read this really valuable thing, or I saw this cool video, and yeah, they had their logo on it, or they had their website, URL. There was some contact information at the end, but it felt like I could have gotten this from any news source. This is really good authoritative information shared by experts. They clearly know what they're doing, and it's almost by holding back and not seeming like you just need to go pull them in and get them as a customer right off the bat. That makes the whole the value of the content is increased by its apparent neutrality. Yeah.
So it sounds like showing value and trust are obviously very important when it comes to content marketing to not only acquire new customers, but to retain and engage your current ones. But what if I have several different audiences, several different buyer personas? How do I manage all of those audiences? And how do I make sure the content that I'm pushing out is relevant to all of them?
A lot of times the word persona gets tossed around a lot, and it's used almost synonymous with segmentation, which it really isn't. To create a persona is a lot of work, right. But it's time well spent. And it's often best done by thinking about who you're currently in contact with, who is buying from you right now, and what is that person like. And it's not so much that you have to nail them by age or by gender or by their demographics specifically, but more importantly, what is their mindset? Why are they here doing business with you? What do they get out of the relationship? What is your value to them? What information or help do they come to you seeking? And it may be that there's only one or two like that, and you can't have personas for everybody, or you'll just simply go crazy. You really need to limit it to just a small handful, particularly for a website. But you could have 2, 3, 4 different distinct audiences, and you should have a shorthand for each one of those people. If it's Peggy Purchaser or whoever that is, right? Or Sid the CEO. But you have a very clear idea of who that person is. They're not just a cardboard cutout or a stereotype. You know what their problems are. You know what keeps them up. You know what kinds of questions they ask. And to some degree, you know what they're searching for. You've looked at that search space and you've mapped that out. So you have a pretty good idea of what the prevalent searches are in that particular topic and who is served by that information. And then you take all of that and start to think about how you want to segment that. And the outcome of that is to create a content calendar where those personas are identified in that content calendar. And that interacts with other aspects of the calendar, such as the themes that you're choosing, the content pillars and so forth. But to address the question of personas, that's where that ends up, so that it is consciously on your radar and part of your strategy.
I think the really, really important thing here when we're talking about these personas is that they're actually research-based personas with data from your actual audience. If you're pulling from your sales team and your internal conversations about what you think about these folks, that's really not going to cut it here. You've got to go out and do the research, dig into the tools that are going to be pulling together all of the different profiles and interest bases and things like that for some of your targets. And a great place to start that research is taking a look at some of your most successful, best target customers and plugging them into some of these tools to see what they're actually truly interested in, what their social profiles look like, what sites they're visiting, things like that, so that you're building an actually data-informed persona instead of just what you internally think about your customers. There's a huge difference there. And you're going to miss the mark if you do it internally.
So that's a great answer as to how I can manage the different audiences or even determine the different audiences. But let's go back to the content and making sure that the content is relevant to those audiences. Andy, you mentioned making sure you've defined your core content pillars and a content calendar, maybe establishing KPIs. Can you further elaborate on that?
Well, there don't have to be 4 pillars, but there should be some number of pillars. It could be generally anywhere between 2 and 5. It's probably going to be not much manageable. If you get much beyond 5, you should be thinking about how you're categorizing that content. But what are you really about? I mean, when you're telling your story, think of them as the poles holding up the tent, right? They're often referred to as tent poles. Like, what are the big thematic areas that you are going to be doing your storytelling around? And then around those thematic areas, those tent poles, you're going to cluster stories that will just naturally fall in place. So for example, with 08, one of our tent poles is content management systems, CMS. And then the stories that cluster around those tent poles include things such as different CMSs, Drupal versus WordPress, or how CMSs do or do not support SEO, or any number of other kinds of topics. So essentially, if CMS expertise is important as part of your story, and you've got a lot of different stories that you can tell, that suggests itself as a tentpole. And that can be a topic of debate and discussion because it does have to. It may be something you consider highly important, but then when you actually go out and look at what your customers are buying, it turns out that maybe that's less important than what you thought. Or you make a conscious decision to say, well, this isn't important in the current environment, but we want it to be important. So we're going to build a base of content around this. And therefore that tentpole we have to really build that area out. So that strategy of figuring out those large areas, and again, could be 2, 3, 4, probably not much more than that, not much more than 5, or you're really overextending yourself or diluting the value of your content strategy. Most of what you have to say should really fit under one of those areas, and essentially ladder back up to those business goals of, I'm telling these stories because that will associate me with these topics that people care about, and people will understand that we have expertise that can help them. And that is ultimately what we're trying to do.
Great. So I obviously can't write all of this content myself, right? So how can I get my employees or my colleagues to participate in content marketing?
Well, they'll probably just hire an intern, right? And then they just do it all.
Perfect.
Perfect, right? Which is unfortunately what we see a lot of. Not just at 08, but just throughout my time in marketing, it's unfortunate how many times that happens where somebody just, oh, hey, great, here's somebody who's, available for the summer. Let's have them do it. Often really talented people, but it should be the people who have expertise in your organization that's really the value that you're sharing. And unfortunately, those people are busy. So this is not easy. This is why people kind of go the intern route, because they can just throw it at a low cost resource, but that's not going to produce the valuable content that is going to really differentiate you and get people to search and click.
Yeah, I think the key here is really to leverage the internal expertise of those SMEs. This will not only help establish credibility on the part of the larger brand, but also helps the personal brand of those individuals and helps to boost morale internally. I mean, a few employee features with the help and guidance of the marketing team, that can go a really long way toward getting the ball rolling on content generation around these tent poles that Andy's talking about here.
And when you think about it, most organizations are already set up to do this. They have their thought leaders, right? They have the people who often do go to conferences, sit on panels, give addresses, occasionally write byline articles or do interviews with the media. There's a little bit of a false expectation like, well, those people don't have time to be generating content. They're too busy doing all this other stuff. But all of that other stuff is essentially generating content. Mm-hmm. That speech that person gave at a conference, or that recording of them on that panel, or that interview they gave, which 9/10 of it didn't make it into the article, but that's all stuff that person knows like the back of their hand. All of that can be repurposed. And there's many, many different ways to tell that story, or to even tell pieces of that story. So tapping those experts, if it's done consciously with some forethought, is not nearly as onerous as it might seem at first. It's not a question of just saying, go sit in the corner and write something and do it quick because we need content this week. It's more that they're already doing it and figuring out how to reframe that in order to do the storytelling that you need to do.
And that's a great point, Andy. Like if folks are nervous about writing something or creating an ebook, maybe don't have your team do that. A great place to start, and where most people are really excited, what most people are really excited to do is to talk about themselves and the things that they know well. And so sitting down with a tape recorder or, for a podcast style thing, having some questions queued up to help guide that conversation, much like we're doing here, is a great way to get folks talking. And then that can turn into a transcript and into, pieces can be taken out and rechunked later on by the marketing team into ebooks and infographics and all kinds of stuff. So, it doesn't have to be this big, huge, mountain. Make it a tiny little molehill just by sitting down with folks and having a conversation.
When I was at Weber Shandwick, we approached this from the standpoint that we thought of it as a series of concentric rings. At the very core of the ring, sort of the core of the earth, as it were, is the assets that you have, right? It's your people, it's your expertise, it's all of the stuff that you have internally that is just sitting around waiting to be repurposed, or at least can be the essential raw material for the news that you have to share, the history of your company. There's all of these things. When you sit down and you start thinking about the stories that you could use those things to tell, you very quickly develop a very long list of possible stories.
Yeah, and we've set up a great employee advocacy program to boost engagement and do just that, to do better about repurposing our content, because we do have so many thought leaders who are coming up with awesome things. So we just do little, Slack reminders once a week? What content have we created this week that can be repurposed? We also send a bi-weekly internal content newsletter that's just a compilation of everything that we've created here at O8, and all of our colleagues can essentially just choose to share which ones that they have interest in, or maybe they can contribute and continue to elaborate on it, or take an article and make it into an infographic, or take a video and make it into their own blog post, or add it to their LinkedIn. And you see those engagements boost not only internally, but then also with their clients. And so I think it's a really, really important thing to get people engaged. So to wrap it up, how can we measure the content's influence on sales and revenue? How can we tell that this concept of content marketing is actually working?
You're going to measure it on a couple of different ways. I mean, you're going to measure people's engagement with the content itself to see whether or not they are in fact finding it, consuming it, and sharing it, liking it. So there's that whole aspect of, is the content reaching its audience? Are you building audience around it? Do you have more people coming to your site, and is it or to your social feeds and subscribing? Are you building followership? Are you building engagement? Are you getting shares, et cetera, et cetera? Are people giving you feedback and saying, oh, that was a great post, I learned so much, and so forth? So there's some quantitative and qualitative metrics that you can use at that level to say, great, my content is engaging its audience. On the flip side of that, or I should say deeper into the funnel, the real question is, are they coming back and are they converting? And so for your bottom of funnel content, is your content sufficiently attractive that people are willing to go from essentially anonymous site visitors to known contacts or known leads, knowing that they're going to then probably be contacted at some point, or be emailed, or that they're essentially, people know they're stepping into a sales funnel when they do that. But by that time you have their trust, and they feel that trust is not going to be abused. And ultimately then you follow that through and look at who is essentially buying and what is the lifetime value of that customer. So that's the long game, is to look at the LTV and say, where did those people come from? And do I have the attribution value chain built in such a way that I can work backwards and say, yes, this person came to us 2 years ago, and the first time they arrived on our site, it was because of this blog post, which was related to this particular topic or set of keywords that we were very, very interested in doing storytelling around.
For us, that always comes back to the KPIs that we establish that are tying into measurable value for your organization, and then the tracking, the analytics and insights platforms and tools that lay the foundation to make that possible. Having cross-device and cross-platform tracking that feeds into your CRM here is going to be vital, so that you can then take, and even before a visitor becomes a prospect, you're gathering information on them about how they're using their site, what content they're consuming, and potentially even, depending on your MarTech stack, what they're sharing on their social platforms, connecting all that back to say, these types of customers have interacted, and usually there's a very clear correlation between interaction with this type of content and the value of that customer over the lifespan of that visitor. So really making sure that your MarTech stack is up to snuff. You've got your tracking and your analytics pieces really nailed down here, and integrated well with your CRM are going to be key.
Well, thanks so much, guys. That was super helpful, and we'll chat soon for the next O8 On.